My task today is to convince you that we need creative accountants and that creative accounting is not a bad thing, in fact. So that's what I want to talk about. And I want to start by talking about an accountant who was really quite creative, and that is a fellow by the name of David Freeling. He is a C.P.A. He was born near New York City. He went to school at Cornell and got a business degree. This is his lovely wife, Robin. They have 2 children, Josh and Jeremy. He's the past president of the Rockland chapter of the New York Society of C.P.A.s, and he's on the board of directors of the Jewish Community Center of Rockford. But you may have heard of David Freeling, but it wasn't because of his good work on the board or his good work with the New York Society of C.P.A.s. It was because of some other work that he did. And that was, he was Bernie Madoff's auditor. Now, in fact, he wasn't really Bernie Madoff's auditor. He just got paid to be the auditor. He didn't actually do any audits. He received about $3 million from the Madoff organization and attested to the financial statements of the Madoff organization, but there's no evidence that he actually did any work to audit Madoff. He was, in fact, one of the facilitators of the largest Ponzi scheme in history that Bernie Madoff pulled off. Ironically, David also invested substantial amounts of money with Bernie Madoff. When most people think of creative accounting, they think of David Freeling. They think of accounts receivable being turned into accounts deceivable, which is what Bernie Madoff and David Freeling were masters of. They think of accounting tricks to make bad numbers look like good numbers. Certainly all of that is true, but I'm in this business of educating accountants as professionals, and part of what I think is essential is that they learn to be creative, but in a different way. And this is some work with Professor Stephanie Bryant, who's at the University of South Florida, and another university with a great basketball team, VCU, Ben Weir, who's at Virginia Commonwealth. So what I want to talk about is, does accounting work require creativity? We did several studies with respect to this. The first one looked at a large US government database and compared the creativity required in accounting with that required in other professions, including law, including medicine, including engineering, and a comparison with a large sample of all US occupations. And the actual questions on the survey, which again is archival data that we gathered, were how important is thinking creatively to your job, what level of the creative thinking is required for your current job. And the results were that accounting required, on average, no less creativity than did engineering, than did healthcare, than did law, which was a surprise to, in fact, some of my colleagues. Secondly, there were differences within accounting, and a surprise to us was that the area of accounting that required the most creativity was financial accounting. Now that's a surprise because financial accounting is often thought of as being standard-driven, driven by rules, but in fact, the people we talked with who are actually involved in financial accounting, financial analysis, will talk about the complexity of doing quality financial analysis and the need for judgment and the need to creativity to understand how to look at a bank that may have changed dramatically from what it was doing 10 and 15 years ago. So the first study gave us some evidence that accounting does in fact require creativity. No less creativity than other professions that you're familiar with. And secondly, that financial analysis required the most creativity. This is actually a very creative accountant pictured here. Stephen Began is an amazingly talented singer, and he was also a Big Four auditor. But you can see videos of him on American Idol. So, armed with the data from the first study, we did a second study. And that was to look at, do accounting students, do people who practice accounting have creativity? So that was the first question. And then the second question was, are more creative accountants less ethical? Because the notion of a creative accountant is a cheater, a liar, a David Freeling. So we wanted to gather some data about whether people who in fact test as more creative are in fact less ethical. So that was the second study. Excuse me. So we gathered some data archivally in relation to accountants' personalities. There's actually large data sets that are available for examining this. And there is something called the Accountants personality. The accountant's personality is not what you're thinking. It's not boring. It's not dull. It's not uninteresting. It's not unengaging. It is someone who's very concerned with data, very concerned with the facts, as opposed to more abstract notions. It's also someone who is a more judging personality, who works from data and facts as opposed from intuition and feeling. So accountants tend to be more sensing and less intuiting. They tend to be more judging, working from facts and data, as opposed to intuition and feeling. And in fact, the data suggests that people who are of SJ personality type, which are most accountants, tend to be, on average, less creative than our NT personality types. And those of you from marketing, on average, tend to be NT personality types more so than SJ personality types. And actually, I live next to a guy who's in marketing, and he says whenever he has to listen to accountants, it makes his head hurt. So we measured creativity among 3 groups. One is United States Army Corps of Engineers accountants. Another was master's students in accounting from 3 different universities, and then MBA students from 2 universities, and assessed their creativity using several different measures of creativity, 2 of which we actually report in the study. And the results indicated that, in fact, accountants and Master of Accountancy students, on average, had lower levels of creativity than did MBA students, which suggests one of 2 things. Either people who choose to go into accounting, on average, have lower levels of creativity, or my colleagues and I beat creativity out of accountants who enter the profession. And it's not clear which of those is true. So, on average, the data we have suggests that accountants are, in fact, less creative than at least MBA students. So the second part of the question was, are more creative accountants, are more creative MBA students less ethical? So here we looked at some measures of ethical position, some notions of whether you are more idealistic or realistic. And those who commit fraud and deception, on average, tend to be more realistic and less idealistic. And the extent to which individuals were more relativistic versus absolutist. And on average, the David Freelings and the Bernie Madoffs of the world tend to be more relativistic and less absolutist. And our results were no difference, no relationship. No relationship between creativity and ethics in the data we looked at, which turned out to be a fairly large data set. So on average, creative individuals tended to be slightly more idealistic, which would lead you to believe they would be more ethical on average. But it was really a pretty weak relationship here. So we gathered some additional data. We went out and talked to accountants, both at the Army Corps of Engineers and other places, and said, what does it mean to be creative if you're an accountant? And it was actually very interesting to hear these people talk, because they talked about helping people solve problems that they couldn't figure out how to solve, how to make the system work so that a vendor could get paid, so that a bridge could get completed, so that commerce in a particular part of America could actually get done. These are U.S. Corps of Engineers accountants. So they talked about ad hoc problem solving, they talked about system problems, they talked about problems with the budget that had to somehow be worked around so that people could get paid, despite the fact that occasionally Congress didn't approve the money directly, but they knew the money was coming and they had to get the bridge done. So it was a number of real issues like this that had nothing to do with ethical issues. So the common belief that creative accounting is falsification, that it's fraud, is certainly prevalent, is certainly the dominant view of creative accounting, but I propose a different view. And that is the accountants I know that are best are in fact very creative, but also very ethical. There's a picture of my high school graduation, by the way. Right, so the people I know who are partners in accounting firms, the people I know who are the best at what they do are also very creative, and that's certainly true for accountants also. They know how to use social media to attract business to the firm. They know how to use emerging technologies. They know how to work in global markets. And all of that requires innovative, creative ways of thinking. So, does anyone see anything unusual about this picture of me here? It's a rubber chicken. Yeah, it's the official Kentucky chicken, right? Yeah, which I try to model from time to time. So if you're an accountant, my plea to you is be ethical and be creative. Thank you.